I was standing in my backyard, watching the irrigation system water my vegetable garden, when a silver SUV screeched into my driveway like someone had just robbed a bank. Out stepped a woman in her mid-40s with the kind of haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," and sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly water bill. She marched across my lawn with such purpose that I genuinely thought someone had died. "Excuse me," she shouted, waving a folder above her head like it was a weapon. "Are you aware that what you're doing is completely illegal?" I turned off the hose I'd been adjusting and wiped my hands on my jeans. "I'm sorry, what? This irrigation, this excessive water usage." "I'm Patricia Hendricks, president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, and I'm here to inform you that you are in direct violation of our community water conservation guidelines." I looked at my garden, then back at Patricia. "Madam, I'm watering my vegetables." "It's not exactly excessive." She pulled out a piece of paper from her folder and thrust it toward me. "According to Section 14.3 of the HOA bylaws, all irrigation must be limited to twice weekly, and only between the hours of 6 and 8 in the morning. You are clearly in violation." I glanced at my watch. It was 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. "Look, I appreciate your concern, but there's no but about it, Mr. O'Connor, Isaac O'Connor. Mr. O'Connor, the rules exist for everyone's benefit. We've been experiencing drought conditions, and every resident needs to do their part." I bit back a laugh. "Drought conditions? In Washington state, we just had 2 weeks of rain." Patricia's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. "That is completely beside the point. The HOA has rules, and those rules must be followed. If you continue this behavior, we'll have no choice but to issue fines. $50 per violation per day." I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "Mrs. Hendricks, I understand you have rules, but my property draws water from my own private source. I'm not using community water." "Your own source?" She looked skeptical, her eyes narrowing behind those expensive sunglasses. "Yes, I own the lake that borders this property. Lake Morrison. All my irrigation comes from there." The transformation on her face was something between shock and disbelief. "That's impossible. Lake Morrison is a public resource. Everyone uses it." "Actually, no, it's private property, has been for 3 generations. My grandfather bought it in 1952, and it's been in my family ever since." Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "That can't be right. I use that lake every morning for my paddle boarding. There are trails around it. People fish there." "Yeah, I allow public access. Always have. My grandfather believed in sharing the land, so I've kept it open for recreational use, but it's definitely mine." She shook her head vigorously. "I don't believe you. You're just making this up to avoid following the rules." I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through my files. "Would you like to see the property deed? Or maybe the tax records? I pay quite a bit each year to keep that lake maintained." Patricia snatched the phone from my hand before I could react. She stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity, her face going through several shades of red and white. Finally, she handed it back to me. "This doesn't change anything," she said, though her voice had lost some of its earlier conviction. "You're still part of this HOA, and you still need to follow the rules. The rules about conserving community water, which I'm not using. The rules about irrigation times and frequency, which you are clearly violating." I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache coming on. "Mrs. Hendricks, with all due respect, if I'm using my own water source, those rules don't really apply to me." "Everything applies to everyone in this community, Mr. O'Connor. That's what an HOA is for. Now, I'm giving you a formal warning." If I see this irrigation system running outside of approved hours again, you'll be fined." She turned on her heel and marched back to her SUV, leaving me standing in my backyard with my mouth hanging open. As she drove away, I noticed my neighbor, Frank Martinez, leaning over his fence with an amused expression. "That looked fun," he called out. "Patricia Hendricks just tried to tell me I can't water my own garden with my own lake water." Frank let out a low whistle. "She's been on a rampage lately. Last month, she tried to fine the Johnsons for having the wrong shade of beige on their mailbox. They had to repaint it 3 times before she approved it. That's insane." "That's Patricia. She became HOA president 6 months ago and has been drunk on power ever since. Word of advice: don't engage with her, it only makes things worse." I should have listened to Frank. I really should have. But the next morning at 7, as I was having my coffee on the back porch, Patricia's SUV pulled up again. This time she had company, a tall, thin man with a clipboard who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Mr. O'Connor," Patricia called out as she approached. "This is Gerald Thompson from the County Water Management Office. I've asked him to inspect your property." Gerald gave me an apologetic look and extended his hand. "Sir, I'm sorry about this. Mrs. Hendricks filed a complaint about excessive water usage and I'm required to follow up." I shook his hand and gestured toward the lake. "Be my guest, like I told Mrs. Hendricks yesterday. All my irrigation comes from Lake Morrison, which I own." Gerald's eyebrows shot up. "You own Lake Morrison?" "I do, have the deed and everything." Patricia crossed her arms. "I want a full investigation. I want to know if he's pulling water from community sources and just claiming it's from the lake." We spent the next hour walking around my property while Gerald inspected my irrigation system. He traced every pipe, checked every connection, and verified that, yes, everything drew from the lake. By the end of it, he looked thoroughly annoyed with Patricia. "Mrs. Hendricks, everything here is completely legal and above board. Mr. O'Connor has every right to use water from his own property however he sees fit. But the HOA rules don't supersede property rights," Gerald interrupted. "If he owned a well, you couldn't control that either. I'm sorry, but there's no violation here." Patricia's face had gone from red to purple. "This is ridiculous. There has to be something." "There isn't," Gerald said firmly. He turned to me. "Mr. O'Connor, thank you for your patience. You're all set." He handed me his card. "If she bothers you about this again, give me a call." After they left, I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. It was from the Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, officially notifying me of multiple violations and assessing fines totaling $350. The violations listed were absurd: irrigating outside approved hours, excessive water usage, failure to submit an irrigation plan for approval, and my personal favorite, creating a nuisance for other residents. I called the number on the letter and got Patricia's voicemail. "This is Patricia Hendricks, HOA president. Leave a message and I'll return your call at my convenience." "Mrs. Hendricks, this is Isaac O'Connor. I just received a letter about fines that are completely unjustified. We need to talk about this immediately." She didn't call back that day. Or the next. On the 3rd day, I decided to attend the monthly HOA meeting listed on their website. It was being held at the community center, a modest building near the neighborhood entrance. When I arrived, about 20 people were scattered around folding chairs arranged in a semicircle. Patricia sat at a table at the front, flanked by 2 other board members, a nervous-looking younger woman and an older man who seemed half asleep. Patricia's face soured when she saw me walk in. "Mr. O'Connor, how nice of you to join us." "I thought it was time I got involved in community affairs," I said, taking a seat in the back row. The meeting was mind-numbingly boring for the first 30 minutes. They discussed paint colors, tree trimming schedules, and whether the community entrance sign needed new flowers. Then, under new business, Patricia brought up the water conservation crisis. As many of you know, we've been experiencing concerning levels of water usage in our community. I've identified several residents who are flagrantly disregarding our conservation guidelines. She looked directly at me. One resident in particular has been irrigating his property at all hours, using excessive amounts of water and showing complete disregard for community standards. A woman in the front row raised her hand. Who? I don't think we need to name names, Patricia said, though she kept staring at me. But action must be taken. I'm proposing we increase fines for water violations to $100 per day. Excuse me, I said, standing up. I think if you're going to talk about me, you should at least be honest about the situation. Patricia's jaw clenched. Mr. O'Connor, you're welcome to speak during the public comment period at the end of the meeting. I'd rather speak now, since you just spent 5 minutes talking about my property. The older man at the table, his name tag said Robert Chen, treasurer, looked confused. What's this about, Patricia? I walked to the front of the room. Mrs. Hendricks has been harassing me about irrigating my garden, claiming I'm violating HOA water conservation rules. What she's failed to mention is that I use water exclusively from Lake Morrison, which I own privately. The County Water Management Office has already confirmed everything I'm doing is legal. Several people started whispering. The nervous woman at the table, Sandra Mills, secretary, looked at Patricia. You didn't mention the lake situation. Because it's irrelevant, Patricia snapped. The rules apply to everyone. Actually, Robert said slowly, pulling out a binder, I'm looking at our bylaws right now. Section 14.3 specifically mentions conservation of community water resources. If Mr. O'Connor is using his own private water source, I don't think this section applies. Patricia snatched the binder from him. That's not how it's meant to be interpreted. The spirit of the rule is about conservation, period. The spirit doesn't matter in bylaws, a man in the audience called out. The letter of the law matters. More people started talking, and the meeting devolved into chaos. Patricia tried to regain control by banging a gavel, but people kept arguing. Eventually, Robert suggested they table the discussion until the next meeting and consult with their HOA attorney. Patricia looked like she wanted to explode, but she agreed. As the meeting ended, several residents came up to me. I'm so glad you spoke up, one woman said. Patricia's been unbearable lately. She tried to fine my husband for parking our car on the street overnight when our garage door was broken. She made us cut down a tree that had been on our property for 20 years because she said it was unsightly. Another man added, by the time I left, it was clear Patricia had made enemies. But I also knew she wasn't going to let this go. Sure enough, the next morning I woke up to find my irrigation system had been vandalized. Someone had cut through several hoses and broken the main valve. Water was spraying everywhere, and my garden was turning into a mud pit. I called the police and filed a report. Officer David Williams came out to take photos and statements. Any idea who might have done this? I told him about my ongoing dispute with Patricia. He wrote it down but said without evidence, there wasn't much they could do. I'll increase patrols in this area. Set up a camera if you have one. I spent the rest of the day repairing the damage and installing 2 security cameras. The parts alone cost me $200, not to mention the time. That evening, Frank came over with a 6-pack of beer. Heard about your irrigation system. That's low, even for this neighborhood. I can't prove it was Patricia, but the timing is suspicious. Oh, it was definitely her or someone she put up to it. She's vindictive. He took a sip of his beer. You know what's funny? She's out on that lake every single morning. Paddle boards for an hour, then sits on the dock by the South Shore. My dock. Wait, there's a dock on the South Shore. Yeah, my grandfather built it in the 60s. I've been meaning to refurbish it. Frank started laughing. So Patricia has been using your lake, your dock, and then has the nerve to harass you about water usage. Apparently so. Man, you should kick her off the property. I thought about it. I really did. But that felt petty, and despite everything, I didn't want to be that kind of person. The lake was big enough for everyone, and I'd never restricted access before. The next week, I received another certified letter. This time, it was from a law firm representing the HOA. They were demanding I cease all irrigation immediately and pay the outstanding fines, which had now ballooned to $800 with late fees and administrative charges. I called my own lawyer, Marcus Peterson, who'd handled my grandfather's estate. He read through the HOA's demands and started laughing. Isaac, this is the most ridiculous thing I've seen in years. They have absolutely no legal standing. So what do? Ignore them. If they try to put a lien on your property, we'll fight it and win. In the meantime, document everything. Every interaction, every letter, every violation notice. I followed his advice, but the harassment didn't stop. Patricia started driving by my house multiple times a day. She'd slow down, take photos, and drive off. Other HOA members started leaving notes on my door about community standards and being a good neighbor. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I was doing some maintenance on the dock when I heard voices. Patricia and 3 other women were paddle boarding toward me. This is private property, I called out as they approached. Patricia paddled closer. The lake is a public resource, Mr. O'Connor. We have every right to be here. Actually, you don't. I've allowed public access out of courtesy, but this is my property. I can revoke that access whenever I want. One of the other women, who I recognized from the HOA meeting, looked nervous. Patricia, maybe we should go. We're not going anywhere, Patricia said. He's bluffing. I pulled out my phone and called the non-emergency police line. Hi, this is Isaac O'Connor at 4782 Lakeview Drive. I have trespassers on my private property who are refusing to leave. Patricia's confident expression faltered. You can't be serious. I'm very serious, Mrs. Hendricks. You've been harassing me for weeks, vandalizing my property and making my life miserable. Now you're trespassing. I'm done being nice. The other women immediately started paddling away, but Patricia held her ground. This is public land. Everyone knows that. It's not, and I have the deed to prove it. Now leave before the police arrive. She finally left, but not before shouting, "You'll regret this. The HOA will make your life hell." Officer Williams arrived 15 minutes later. I explained the situation and showed him the property boundaries on my phone. He took notes and said, "I can't do much about her being on the lake since you've historically allowed public access, but if she continues to harass you, you can file for a restraining order. It might come to that." Things escalated quickly after that. The HOA called an emergency meeting to discuss the lake access crisis. I didn't attend, but Frank did and filled me in afterward. "It was insane," he said. "Patricia got up and gave this whole speech about how you're trying to steal the lake from the community. She claimed your deed is fraudulent and that the lake has always been public property. That's completely false. I know, but she had people worked up. She's talking about organizing a protest. Some residents are even talking about suing you." I called Marcus again. He suggested I get ahead of the situation by publishing the property records publicly. If the HOA wants to make this a community issue, let's show everyone the facts. I created a simple website with scanned copies of the deed, historical photos of my grandfather at the lake, tax records, and a timeline of my family's ownership. I posted the link on the neighborhood Facebook group with a straightforward explanation. I've received questions about Lake Morrison's ownership. Here are the facts. My family has owned this property since 1952. We've always allowed public access because we believe in sharing natural resources. However, recent harassment from the HOA has made me reconsider this policy. I hope we can resolve this situation amicably. The response was mixed. Some people thanked me for clarifying and apologized for the confusion. Others, clearly influenced by Patricia, accused me of lying and trying to privatize a public resource. One woman even threatened to organize resistance if I tried to restrict lake access. But then something unexpected happened. A local news reporter named Jennifer Chen reached out. She'd seen the Facebook posts and thought it was an interesting human interest story. Small-town HOA drama with a twist, she called it. I agreed to an interview, and a few days later, Jennifer and a cameraman showed up at my house. We walked down to the lake and I showed her the dock, explained the history and talked about the ongoing dispute with Patricia. "Have you met Mrs. Hendricks?" Jennifer asked. We tried. She declined to comment. The story aired that evening on the local news. It was fairly balanced, presenting both the historical facts about the lake's ownership and the HOA's concerns about water conservation. But what really caught attention was the footage of the lake itself, beautiful, serene, with families fishing on the shore and kids playing in the water. The news piece ended with Jennifer saying, "The question remains, in a community that values both private property rights and public access to nature, how do we find common ground?" The story went viral locally. By the next morning, it had been picked up by regional news outlets and was being discussed on morning radio shows. Most of the coverage was sympathetic to my position, but it also put pressure on both me and the HOA to resolve the situation. Patricia responded by doubling down. She sent out a mass email to all HOA members claiming I was trying to steal the community's lake and calling for a special assessment to fund legal action against me. The email was full of inflammatory language and outright lies about my intentions. Marcus advised me to stay quiet and let Patricia dig her own hole. "She's making herself look unreasonable. Don't engage." But staying quiet became impossible when I discovered Patricia had filed a complaint with the county claiming I was restricting public access to navigable waters, which would be illegal. It was complete nonsense. I hadn't restricted anything, but it meant I had to spend time and money responding to official inquiries. I also learned that Patricia had been spreading rumors around the neighborhood. According to Frank, she was telling people I planned to fence off the entire lake, build a mansion on the shore, and possibly even drain it to expand my property. None of this was true, but rumors spread fast. I started getting hostile looks from neighbors when I went to the grocery store. Someone keyed my truck in the parking lot. Another person left a nasty note on my windshield calling me a greedy land grabber. The situation came to a head at the next HOA meeting. Marcus suggested I attend and make a formal statement to clear the air. "You need to address these rumors directly, face to face." The meeting room was packed. Every seat was filled and people lined the walls. Patricia sat at her table with a satisfied expression, clearly thinking the turnout was in her favor. When it came time for public comments, I stood up. The room went silent. "I know there's been a lot of confusion and misinformation about Lake Morrison," I began. "I want to set the record straight. My family has owned this lake for 74 years. We've always allowed public access, and I have no intention of changing that. I'm not building a fence. I'm not building a mansion. I'm not draining the lake. All I want is to irrigate my garden in peace without being harassed." Someone in the front row shouted, "Then why did you threaten to kick Patricia off the property?" "Because Mrs. Hendricks has been harassing me for weeks. She's filed false complaints, spread lies about me, and according to the police report I filed, someone vandalized my irrigation system the day after our first confrontation. I asked her to leave my property because she was trespassing, not because I want to restrict public access." Patricia stood up, her face red. "That's a lie. I never vandalized anything." "I didn't say you did. I said someone did, and the timing was suspicious." The room erupted in arguments. People were shouting over each other, and Robert had to bang the gavel repeatedly to restore order. Sandra, the secretary, raised her hand timidly. "Can I say something?" Everyone quieted down. Sandra looked nervous but determined. "I've been secretary for 3 years, and I've gone through all our records. There's nothing in the HOA bylaws that gives us authority over private water sources. Mr. O'Connor is right. Section 14.3 only applies to community resources. We have no legal standing to fine him or restrict his irrigation." Patricia glared at her. "That's your interpretation." "It's not just my interpretation. I spoke with our attorney and he agrees. In fact, he advised me to tell the board that if we continue pursuing this, Mr. O'Connor would have grounds to sue the HOA for harassment." The room went silent. Robert looked at Patricia. "Is this true? Did you know our attorney said we have no case?" Patricia's face went through several expressions before settling on defiant anger. "The attorney is wrong. The bylaws are clear." "Patricia," Robert interrupted, "if our own lawyer says we're wrong, we're wrong. This needs to stop. I'm the president of this HOA and I decide." "No," Robert said firmly. "The board decides. And I'm calling for a vote right now to drop all fines against Mr. O'Connor and issue a formal apology." "I second that," Sandra said quickly. They voted. Robert and Sandra in favor, Patricia against. The motion passed. Patricia stood up so fast her chair fell backward. "This is a betrayal. I've worked tirelessly for this community, and this is how you repay me. You've abused your authority," Robert said quietly. "You've harassed a resident based on personal vendetta rather than facts. That's not leadership." Patricia grabbed her belongings and stormed out. The room remained silent for a long moment before someone started clapping. Then others joined in, and suddenly half the room was applauding. Robert looked exhausted. "I apologize, Mr. O'Connor. This should never have gone this far. I appreciate that. We'll send you a formal letter dropping all fines and removing the violations from your record. And for what it's worth, thank you for continuing to allow public access to the lake. It means a lot to this community." I thought that would be the end of it. The HOA had backed down, Patricia had been humiliated, and I could go back to my normal life. But Patricia wasn't done. 2 days after the meeting, I noticed something strange. The water level in the lake seemed lower than usual. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but by the next day, it was obvious the lake was draining. I walked the entire perimeter and found it on the north side. Someone had dug a trench connecting the lake to a drainage ditch that fed into a creek. Water was flowing out at an alarming rate. I immediately called the police. Officer Williams came out with another officer, and they examined the trench. "This is serious," Williams said. "This is deliberate property damage, possibly environmental vandalism. We need to get county environmental services out here." I also called an emergency services company to plug the trench. They brought in equipment and worked through the night to stop the drainage and pump water back in. The cost was going to be enormous, but I had my security cameras. The footage showed someone arriving at midnight 3 days earlier, and spending hours digging the trench. The person was wearing dark clothes and a hood, making identification difficult, but there was one clear shot. When they returned to their vehicle, they walked past a streetlight, and I could see it was Patricia's silver SUV. I showed the footage to Officer Williams. He watched it 3 times, then called his supervisor. Within hours, detectives were involved. They brought Patricia in for questioning. According to Frank, who heard it from another neighbor, Patricia initially denied everything. But when confronted with the video evidence, she broke down and admitted it. She claimed she was protecting the community from a tyrant who wanted to steal their lake. The charges were serious: criminal mischief, environmental vandalism, and criminal trespass. Because the damage exceeded $10,000, it was classified as a felony. The story made news again, this time with a very different angle. HOA president arrested for sabotaging lake was the headline. The coverage was brutal for Patricia, detailing her campaign of harassment and the escalating vandalism. The environmental damage assessment took weeks. The lake had lost about 30% of its water, and several fish species had died due to the rapid drainage. The county environmental department filed additional charges related to wildlife destruction and unauthorized modification of waterways. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue temporary insanity brought on by stress, but the prosecution had documentation of her months-long harassment campaign. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, it was calculated vandalism. The HOA board held another emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Patricia as president. Robert took over as interim president, and one of his first acts was to issue a public apology to me on behalf of the entire community. "We failed in our duty to provide fair and reasonable governance," he said in a statement. "One resident was targeted unfairly, and we allowed it to escalate to the point of criminal activity. We're committed to doing better." The community response was overwhelming. Neighbors I'd never met came by to apologize and offer help. Several people organized a volunteer day to help with lake restoration. The local hardware store donated supplies for my irrigation system. It was touching, honestly. The legal process moved slowly. Patricia's trial was scheduled for 6 months out. In the meantime, she was out on bail but had a restraining order preventing her from coming anywhere near my property or the lake. I spent those months repairing the damage. The lake eventually recovered its water level, and environmental experts I hired said the ecosystem would bounce back within a year or 2. My insurance covered some of the costs, but I was still out of pocket about $15,000. Marcus helped me file a civil lawsuit against Patricia for damages. "She's already facing criminal charges, but you deserve compensation for what she put you through." I also worked with Robert and the new HOA board to create a formal agreement about lake access. We drew up a document that clearly spelled out the lake's private ownership, while guaranteeing continued public access for recreational purposes. The agreement included rules about environmental protection and gave me authority to revoke access for anyone who damaged the property or behaved inappropriately. "This way, everyone knows where they stand," Robert explained at a community meeting. "The lake belongs to Mr. O'Connor, and we're grateful he shares it with us. In return, we respect his property and his rights." The agreement passed with only 2 votes against it, friends of Patricia who still believed she'd been treated unfairly. Patricia's trial finally came in early September. The evidence against her was overwhelming: video footage, witness testimony about her harassment campaign, and her own confession. Her lawyer tried to paint her as a devoted community servant who'd suffered a mental breakdown, But the prosecutor methodically laid out how her actions had been deliberate and sustained over months. I testified about the harassment, the vandalism of my irrigation system, and the impact of the lake drainage. It wasn't pleasant reliving it all, but I kept my testimony factual and unemotional. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge didn't go easy on her. Patricia was sentenced to 2 years in prison, though she'd be eligible for parole after 1 year. She was also ordered to pay full restitution for all damages, which totaled over $30,000, including environmental remediation costs. As they led her out of the courtroom, Patricia looked at me with such hatred that I actually felt a chill. But then I reminded myself that this was her doing, not mine. I just wanted to water my garden. The civil lawsuit settled out of court. Patricia's homeowner's insurance covered most of the damages, and she agreed to pay the remainder in monthly installments. Marcus said we'd probably never see all of it, but at least there was a judgment on record. Life slowly returned to normal. The lake became a genuine community gathering place, with families picnicking on the shores and kids learning to fish from the refurbished dock. I installed better lighting and added some benches that my grandfather would have loved. Frank and I started a tradition of having coffee by the lake every Saturday morning. One morning in October, as we sat watching the sunrise, he said, "You know, this whole mess might have been a blessing in disguise." "How do you figure?" "Well, before all this, nobody really appreciated the lake. It was just there. Now people understand its value and are taking care of it. Plus, the HOA actually has reasonable leadership for the first time in years." He had a point. Robert had proven to be an excellent president, focusing on actual community needs rather than petty power trips. The HOA had even organized lake cleanup days and was working on establishing nature trails around the perimeter with my permission. "And you got a better irrigation system out of it," Frank added with a grin. "That new setup is pretty impressive." I'd used some of the settlement money to upgrade to a state-of-the-art system with smart controls and efficient sprinklers. My garden had never looked better, and I'd expanded it to include a small orchard. True, though I could have done without the death threats and property damage. Fair point. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching ducks paddle across the lake. Then Frank said, "Hey, did you hear Patricia's trying to sell her house?" "Really?" "Yeah, I guess she can't stand living here anymore after everything that happened. Her husband already moved to Seattle. They're getting divorced." I felt a twinge of something, not quite sympathy, but maybe sadness that things had gotten so out of hand. "That's rough." "She brought it on herself, man. You were just watering your vegetables." "I know. Still. Don't go soft on me. She tried to destroy your property and spent months making your life hell. Some people need to face consequences." He was right, of course, but I couldn't help thinking about how a simple dispute over irrigation had spiraled into criminal charges and ruined lives. All because someone couldn't accept being wrong. A few weeks later, I saw the "for sale" sign go up in Patricia's driveway. The house sold quickly. It was a nice property in a good location, despite the drama. A young family moved in, and I made a point of introducing myself and explaining the lake situation up front. "That's amazing that you let everyone use it," the husband said. "Our kids are going to love having a lake so close. Just respect the property and we'll get along fine." And they did. The new neighbors turned out to be wonderful, and their kids spent hours exploring the lake shore and catching frogs. The holidays came and went. By the time spring rolled around again, the whole Patricia situation felt like ancient history. The garden was thriving. My new irrigation system was working perfectly, and the lake had fully recovered. One Saturday morning in April, I was doing some maintenance on the dock when a woman approached pushing a stroller. I recognized her as someone who'd been at some of the HOA meetings, but we'd never formally met. "Mr. O'Connor, I'm Veronica Graham. I just wanted to thank you for keeping the lake open. My daughter loves coming here to see the ducks." "Happy to do it. It's a beautiful spot." "It really is." "And I wanted to apologize. I was one of the people who believed Patricia's lies about you trying to privatize the lake. I should have checked the facts before jumping to conclusions." "Water under the bridge," I said, then laughed at my own unintended pun. "No pun intended," she smiled. "You've been remarkably gracious about this whole thing. A lot of people would have shut down lake access after what happened." I thought about it. But my grandfather always said the best way to build community is through shared spaces and shared experiences. Closing the lake would have punished everyone for one person's actions. Well, the community appreciates it. There's actually talk about naming the lake in your family's honor, making it official on maps and everything. I was touched. That's not necessary, but it's a nice gesture. "We think it is. You could have been petty and vindictive, but instead you chose to be generous. That means something." After she left, I sat on the dock for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened. The harassment, the vandalism, the trial, it had all been exhausting and infuriating. But maybe Frank was right. Maybe something good had come from it. The lake was more active now than it had ever been. People actually cared about maintaining it. The HOA had transformed from a petty dictatorship into a functional community organization. And I'd met neighbors I otherwise never would have known. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Patricia made her first restitution payment. $500. Only $12,500 to go. I typed back, "Progress is progress." As the sun climbed higher, warming the morning air, I started working on the dock again. One of the boards was loose and needed replacing. Simple, straightforward work that produced tangible results. No drama, no conflict, just fixing something that needed fixing. A group of kids ran past, heading for the swimming area on the far side of the lake. Their laughter echoed across the water. An elderly couple I recognized from the neighborhood walked hand in hand along the shore trail. A teenager cast a fishing line from the bank, probably hoping to catch one of the bass that had repopulated after the drainage incident. This was what my grandfather had envisioned when he bought this property back in 1952. Not a private retreat cut off from the world, but a shared resource that brought people together. He'd understood something that Patricia never did. Real power doesn't come from controlling people or enforcing arbitrary rules. It comes from giving freely and trusting others to respect what you've shared. Robert showed up around noon with sandwiches. He'd gotten into the habit of checking in with me regularly, partly out of lingering guilt over the HOA's failures and partly because we'd become genuine friends through the ordeal. "Brought lunch," he announced, holding up a bag. "Hope you like turkey. Perfect timing. I'm starving." We sat on the dock, legs dangling over the water, eating sandwiches and watching the lake activity. "Board meeting next week," Robert said between bites. "Want to come?" "Do I need to?" "No, but I thought you might want to hear about the proposed nature trail expansion. We're thinking about extending it to connect with the county park system. On my property, only if you approve. We'd handle all the maintenance and liability insurance, but if you're not comfortable with it, we'll find another route." I thought about it. More foot traffic meant more potential problems, but it also meant more people enjoying the outdoors and connecting with nature. "Send me the proposed route and the insurance details. I'll consider it." "Fair enough." We finished eating in comfortable silence. Then Robert said, "You know, the whole neighborhood talks about how you handled the Patricia situation. You've become kind of a local legend." I laughed. "That's ridiculous." I'm serious. You stood up to a bully, defended your rights, but didn't let it turn you into a bitter person. People respect that. I just wanted to water my tomatoes, Robert. Yeah, but you could have made it ugly. You could have shut down lake access out of spite. You could have been vindictive. Instead, you worked with us to make things better for everyone. My grandfather would have done the same thing. Then your grandfather was a good man. He was. That evening, as the sun set over Lake Morrison, I stood in my garden surveying the vegetables. The tomatoes were already starting to set fruit. The lettuce was perfect. The beans were climbing their trellises. Everything was exactly as it should be. My phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. Mr. O'Connor, this is Detective Sarah Mitchell. I worked on your case. I remember. What can I do for you? I wanted to let you know that Patricia Hendricks was granted early parole. She'll be released next month. My stomach tightened. That was fast. She's been a model prisoner, attended all the counseling sessions, and the parole board determined she's not a flight risk or danger to the community. I wanted to give you a heads up. I appreciate that. The restraining order is still in effect for another 8 months. If she violates it or contacts you in any way, call us immediately. After hanging up, I stood there processing the information. Part of me worried about what Patricia might do, but a larger part recognized that she'd paid a price for her actions and deserved a chance to move forward. I called Marcus just to be safe. Document everything, he advised. If she shows up anywhere near you or the lake, call the police. Don't engage with her directly. Got it. But honestly, Isaac, I doubt she'll bother you. She lost everything: her position, her reputation, her marriage, her freedom for a year. Most people would learn from that. I hoped he was right. Patricia's release came and went without incident. According to the Neighborhood Gossip Network, she moved in with her sister in Spokane and wasn't planning to return to Meadowbrook Estates. Her ex-husband had already bought out her share of the house, which now belonged entirely to him, though he rented it out rather than living there himself. Summer arrived in full force, and the lake became the neighborhood's primary gathering spot. The HOA organized swimming lessons for kids, weekend barbecues, and even a small fireworks display for the 4th of July. I donated some money for extra safety equipment and lifeguard training. Frank's wife hosted my first official dinner party at their place, and I met several single women in the neighborhood. One of them, Victoria Greenfield, worked as a landscape architect and had fascinating ideas about native plantings around the lake shore. We started spending time together, walking the trails and discussing potential improvements to the property. You could create an entire native ecosystem, she explained one evening as we strolled past the dock. Replace the invasive species with indigenous plants that support local wildlife. It would be beautiful and environmentally beneficial. You'd have to show me how. I'd be happy to. I could even put together a proposal if you're interested. I'm very interested. By August, Victoria and I were officially dating, and she'd begun implementing her native planting plan around the lake. Volunteers from the neighborhood helped with the planting days, turning it into community events. Kids learned about local ecology. Adults got their hands dirty and felt connected to the land. One Saturday, as we were planting a section of native wildflowers, Robert came down with news. Just got off the phone with the county. They're officially recognizing Lake Morrison on all maps with a note about public recreational access. You're making it into the county guidebooks. That's great. There's more. The county commissioner wants to meet with you about possibly creating a formal public access agreement. They'd provide liability coverage and help with maintenance in exchange for guaranteed access. What do you think? I asked Victoria. I think it's a way to protect the lake long term. If something happened to you, this agreement would ensure the lake stays open. She was right. I've been thinking about that lately. I had no kids, and while I had nieces and nephews, there was no guarantee they'd maintain the public access tradition. A formal agreement with the county would preserve it. Set up the meeting, I told Robert. The agreement took months to negotiate, but by the end of October, we had a deal. The county would take over maintenance of the public access area's trails, dock, parking in exchange for a conservation easement guaranteeing recreational access in perpetuity. I retained ownership and all water rights, but the lake would legally remain open to the public forever. The signing ceremony was held at the county courthouse, with local officials, HOA board members, and dozens of neighbors in attendance. The county commissioner gave a speech about the importance of balancing private property rights with public access to natural resources. Lake Morrison has been a gathering place for this community for generations, she said. Thanks to Mr. O'Connor's generosity and vision, it will continue to be for generations to come. There was applause, and several people came up to shake my hand afterward. It felt good, like something important had been accomplished. That night, Victoria and I had dinner at a nice restaurant in town. As we talked about the day's events, she reached across the table and took my hand. You did a really good thing today. We did a good thing. Your native planting plan was part of the agreement. But it was your decision to share something you could have kept for yourself. That takes character. I thought about Patricia, about how her need to control everything had destroyed her life. And I thought about my grandfather, who'd understood that the best things in life are meant to be shared. My grandfather taught me that land isn't really something you can own, I said. You're just a steward for a little while. Your job is to leave it better than you found it and make sure others can enjoy it too. Wise man. He was. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, then Victoria said, So, I have a question. Shoot. That garden of yours. Think you'd ever want to expand it into a full community garden? I could design it, and the HOA could manage plots for residents who don't have good yard space. I laughed. After everything that happened over me watering vegetables, you want to create a whole community garden. Why not? The irrigation infrastructure is already there. You have the space. And it would bring people together. You know what? I love it. Let's do it. And we did. By the following spring, we'd converted an acre of my property into a community garden with 30 plots. Residents applied for spaces, and we held a lottery for the first year. Victoria designed beautiful pathways and shared spaces. I donated the water and helped with the infrastructure. The first planting day was a massive community event. Over 100 people showed up, including families I'd never met before. Kids planted seeds with their parents. Elderly residents shared gardening wisdom. Teenagers reluctantly helped their families but ended up getting into it. Frank cornered me by the tool shed. Remember when Patricia told you to stop watering your tomatoes every day? Look at this. He gestured at the crowd of people working together, laughing and getting dirty. This came from that. Sometimes the worst situations lead to the best outcomes. He was right. If Patricia had never harassed me, I never would have fought back. The lake might have remained an underappreciated resource. The HOA would still be dysfunctional, and I wouldn't have met Victoria or gotten to know my neighbors. As the afternoon wore on and the planting wrapped up, Robert gathered everyone for an announcement. I know we're all tired, but I wanted to take a moment to thank Isaac O'Connor for everything he's done for this community. Because of his generosity, we have a beautiful lake, wonderful trails, and now a community garden. Let's show our appreciation. The applause was long and genuine. I felt my face getting hot from embarrassment, but I also felt proud. This was what community was supposed to look like: people coming together, working together, supporting each other. That evening, as the last families packed up their tools and headed home, I walked down to the dock one more time. The sun was setting, painting the lake in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, I could hear children's laughter from the playground near the north shore. A couple was paddle boarding near the far bank. Someone was fishing from the dock on the south side. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Final restitution payment received from Patricia. You're paid in full. I looked at the message for a long time. The money was nice, but it had never really been about that. It had been about standing up for what was right, about not letting a bully win, about protecting something valuable. I typed back, "Good to hear. Hope she's doing okay." Marcus replied immediately, "You're a better person than me, maybe." Or maybe I just understood that carrying anger and resentment only hurts yourself. Patricia had made terrible choices and paid the price, but her mistakes had inadvertently created something beautiful. Victoria joined me on the dock, slipping her hand into mine. "Beautiful evening. Perfect. Think your grandfather would be proud." I thought about the old man who'd bought this lake all those years ago, who'd built this dock with his own hands, who'd believed in sharing beauty with others. Yeah, I think he would be. We stood there as darkness fell, watching stars appear one by one in the clear sky. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. The lake lapped gently against the dock pilings. Everything was quiet and peaceful and right. The next morning, I woke up early and walked through the garden before heading to work. The tomatoes were thriving. The peppers were loaded with fruit. The beans had exceeded all expectations. I turned on the irrigation system, my fully legal, properly maintained, feeds from my own lake irrigation system, and smiled. It had been a hell of a year. Harassment, vandalism, a criminal trial, community drama. But standing there in my garden, watching the sunrise over Lake Morrison, I felt grateful for all of it. The struggle had brought clarity. The conflict had built community. And the whole ridiculous situation had taught me that sometimes you have to fight for your rights, even when it's exhausting and frustrating. Frank wandered over with his coffee. Starting early, wanted to get the watering done before work. Remember when that was controversial? He laughed, shaking his head. God, Patricia really went off the deep end. She did. You hear she got a job at a garden center in Spokane. Apparently she's doing okay. Humbled, but okay. I didn't know how to feel about that. Part of me was glad she'd found something. Part of me still resented everything she'd put me through. But mostly, I just felt ready to move on. Good for her, I said finally. Everyone deserves a second chance. Frank studied me for a moment. You really mean that, don't you? Yeah, I do. You're a better man than me, Isaac O'Connor. Maybe I was, or maybe I just learned that holding on to anger takes too much energy. Energy better spent growing tomatoes, maintaining a lake, and building a community. As I drove to work that morning, I thought about everything that had happened. A simple irrigation dispute had somehow transformed into a year-long ordeal involving lawyers, police, environmental specialists, and the entire neighborhood. It had cost thousands of dollars, countless hours, and immeasurable stress. But it had also brought unexpected gifts, new friendships, a wonderful girlfriend, a stronger community, and the satisfaction of knowing I'd stood up for what was right. Would I do anything differently if I could go back? Maybe I would have handled those first confrontations with Patricia differently, tried harder to de-escalate. But probably not. Sometimes people are determined to be unreasonable, and no amount of diplomacy will change that. The important thing was how it ended, not with bitterness and division, but with growth and community. The lake was protected. The HOA was functional. The neighborhood was stronger, and my garden was spectacular. The tomatoes alone were going to keep me in salsa and sauce for the entire year. The irrigation system worked perfectly, drawing water from Lake Morrison, my lake, legally and properly, just as it was designed to do. Take that, Patricia Hendricks. Sometimes the good guys really do win.